Hi knitters, I'm Susanne Sommer of SOSUknits, and it's time for part 3 of the Brioche Plus Mystery Knit Along. Today we're going to knit all 4 colors and 1 stitch marker, so there's going to be lots of knitting done in this part, but, and I can promise you that, it's going to be a lot more relaxed than in part 2. So part 2 challenged you by having 2 quite challenging sections, the pearl brioche and the syncopated triangles. So in this part there's not going to be any syncopation. Part 3 will also not have any increases and decreases in brioche, so it's going to be a bit of a more relaxed knitting time this time around. We're going to knit stripes in garter stitch, and in between those stripes in the middle there's going to be some bubbles, and the stripe pattern is going to be on the beginning and the end of part 3, and in the middle we have a little more brioche action. We're going to have 2 color brioche, and we're going to again knit a graphic pattern with it, but this time there's going to be no syncopation, so that takes a lot of the challenge out of it. And there's also not going to be any increases and decreases in there. So it is a little bit the technique like you see here in the Stairway shawl. This tutorial that follows focuses on 2 parts that might be new to you, and that is how to knit those bubbles without turning the book, so knitting backwards on the right side. And there's also going to be a new increase, a lifted directional increase with a purl stitch, so a purled directional increase. So I'm going to show you those 2 things, and the rest should be smooth sailings, and you should be totally fine to work part 3 with all the things you've already learned in the other 2 parts. Okay. Grab your needles, grab your project, and happy knitting! I've already knit the first few rows of section 4, and I just wanted to show you this stripe sequence. You can see here 2 garter ridges in color C, another 2 garter stitch ridges in color D, and 1 here on top in color C again. But the first one down here was actually part of section 3, so the second part of the pattern. And in this third part of the pattern, section 4, we've only knit this additional second garter ridge in color C here. So together they form this pattern, but one of them was part of the last section, and section 4 we've only worked this. We've started here and worked up, but you can carry up color C throughout the section, so you don't have to break color C. What you should do is when you start the second row with color D here, you would want to give them a twist, the yarns, so your color D is carried up on the side without having like a super long float here over those 4 rows. But when you pick it up again here, working the next color C row here, you want to make sure there is enough slack so the edge doesn't get too tight. So you want to give it a bit of a stretch before starting this row, so you see how long this float that is hidden in this twist here should be. So okay, and it's time to start the bubble row. So we're going to work pretty much a normal garter ridge row with all those increases at the beginning, the middle, and the end. But in between we're going to work bubbles, and that is done by working kind of extreme short rows. We're going to increase into 1 stitch and then work those increased stitches back and forth, and then decrease again before continuing to work. I'm working these ones here in section 4 with my color B, and I'm starting just like I had with the other rows. I'm going to knit 2 stitches, make a left slanting increase, and I'm going to knit another 3 stitches. This is where the pattern says to make a bubble into the next stitch. And to do this, we're going to increase into the stitch, and the increase should be familiar from the brioche increases. So we're going to knit the stitch, but we're going to leave it on the left hand needle, make a yarn over, knit the stitch again, make another yarn over, and knit the stitch again. So there's 5 stitches into this one, so we've increased 4 stitches. And there's 2 ways to work this bubble. One would be to turn around and purl those 5 stitches back, then knit them again on the right side, and again turn around and purl them on the wrong side, and decreasing again. But I'm going to do the faster route, which is I'm not going to turn my work and purl on the wrong side. I'm going to stay on the right side and continue working on the right side, but I'm going to knit backwards. So I'm going to knit from the left to the right. And to do that, I'm going to insert my left hand needle through the back loop of the stitch. And I'm going to, with my, so I'm going to hold on to the work with my right hand, and I'm going to bring the working yarn over the left hand needle to the front and under the left hand needle to the back again. And then I'm passing the stitch over. And that's a knit backwards. And I'm doing that again for all those 5 stitches. So insert the needle through the back loop, over the needle, under the needle to the back, and pass over. Insert through the back loop, over the needle to the front, under the needle to the back, and pass over. So this is kind of similar to English style knitting, but with yarn held in the left hand and going into the other direction. So if you're a left-hand knitter, that might feel familiar as well. So I've just knit backwards those 5 stitches, and I'm going to knit them forward the usual direction again. And I'm going to knit them backwards once more. So you could again turn around and purl those 5 stitches, but I'm going to knit them backwards. And to make sure you don't go too far, so make sure it's just those 5 stitches that you knit backwards. You should get a bit of a gap here. So that is the second time I've knit backwards, and now it's time to decrease those 5 stitches back to 1 stitch. And I'm going to make a centered decrease, and that works by slipping the first 3 stitches as if to knit them together. So I'm going to insert my needle as if to knit those 3 stitches together, and then I'm going to just slip them onto the right hand needle, and then I'm knitting the next 2 stitches together, and then I'm passing the 3 stitches that I slipped over and off the needles. So I'm inserting the needle here, careful not to drop the stitch, and pass them over. So now I'm back to the 1 stitch I had initially, but I have those extra rows that I've worked here in between, and that makes this 3-dimensional bubble that's going to stick up over the fabric. You want to make sure it's towards the front, so if it moves towards the back, you can still push it through this little hole here, but it should stick out through the front of the work. And you can just continue working the next 7 stitches. So you want to make sure this last stitch here is tight, so give it a bit of a tug here. So after working another 7 stitches, I'm going to make another bubble with a 4 stitch increase. And I'm knitting them backwards. So again, you could turn around to the wrong side of the work and purl those stitches as well if you're not comfortable with knitting backwards. And it is a bit, it takes a little getting used to. And then I'm going to knit those 5 stitches again. And I'm going to knit them backwards once more. And now it's time to decrease again. I'm going to insert, so you can also count if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th on the needle. When you have 4 rows, you knit them together again. So I'm going to insert the needle as if to knit the 3 together, slip them to the right hand needle, knit the next 2 stitches together, and pass the slipped stitches over. Going to give it a good tug and continue working with knitting 7 stitches. And you can already see them sticking out through the front of the work. To make sure they stay this graphic and centered, I'm going to not work those bobble stitches on the wrong side. So the bobble stitches will be slipped on the wrong side. So they're staying in the center of this color B garter ridge. Making a bobble English style looks a little something like that. So I'm going to make the bobble into the next stitch here, and I'm going to start again with my increase. So I'm going to knit the stitch, leave it on the left hand needle, then bring the yarn forward and knit the stitch again. And bring the yarn forward again and knit the stitch one last time. So that makes 5 stitches out of the 1 stitch, so that's a 4 stitch increase. And again, you could turn around and purl those 5 stitches back, but the faster route is to go backwards. So I'm going to insert my needle through the back loop, and then I'm going to bring the working yarn over the needle to the front and under the needle to the back again. I'm going to lift the stitch over the needle and off the needle. And I'm going to repeat. So insert through the back loop, over the needle to the front and under the needle to the back again. I'm going to hold on here a little while I pass the stitch here over. And it's one of those things, if you've not done it a lot of times, it just feels a little awkward at first, but it's actually a lot faster than having to turn around all the time. And once you've done a couple of those bobbles with the knitting backwards, you're actually going to notice you're going to get a lot faster with it. So I've knit those 5 stitches backwards, so I'm going to knit them forward again, so the usual direction. So let's make another row with the backwards direction. So I'm going to insert the needle through the left hand needle through the back loop of the stitch, bring the yarn over the needle to the front and under the needle to the back again, and pass the stitch with my right hand needle. I'm passing it over. So insert the left hand needle through the back loop of the next stitch, bring the yarn over the needle and pass the stitch over the working yarn with your right hand needle. So it's time to decrease now and bring the stitch count back to 1 stitch. I'm going to insert my needle as if to knit those 3 together, but I'm going to only slip the stitches. So insert as if to knit 3, but I'm only slip them, don't work them. And then knit the next 2 stitches together. And then I'm going to pass the 3 stitches that I've slipped before over and off the needle. So this is a bit fiddly, and if you don't really feel comfortable with this decrease, you can do any other decrease as well that will get your stitch count back to 1, because sometimes you just drop that stitch when you pass them over. So I try to hold on to it, and you can do it separately. So if it doesn't work out, you can do them separately and it will be fine as well. So there's 1 more stitch passed over and my bobble is finished. I have this 1 stitch here remaining, and I can continue working my next 7 stitches and then make another bobble. Okay, so that's 7 stitches worked. You can see that this bubble here kind of disappeared to the background, but you can just push it through and then it's back on the right side. Okay, so I have a bubble every 7, so 7 stitches in between, so every 8 stitches there is a bubble. And I'm going to make one into the next stitch, so I'm going to increase into the stitch. This full stitch increase. And I'm going to knit backwards. And one last stitch, and I can knit forward again. So my 5 bobble stitches, I'm going to knit them forward again, just the normal K5. And then I'm going to knit them backwards once more. Okay, and then we can decrease those 5 stitches back to 1 stitch by inserting the needle as if to knit 3 together and slipping them onto the right hand needle and knitting the next 2 stitches together. and passing the 3 stitches over and off the needles. I'm going to be doing the slow version now, so I'm going to do them one by one, just to make sure that I don't drop the stitch off my needle. So that's the decrease finished. The bubble kind of appears to the front when you keep working the next rows. The next stitches, I'm going to like anchor them and press them to the front. Just going to knit a couple of stitches here. And you can see them appearing to the front. So if they're a bit squished up, you can give them a bit of a tug, and they're going to be nice and round little balls that sit in the center of this garter ridge in color B. Again, we're not going to work those bubble stitches on the wrong side. These will be slipped on the wrong side to make sure they are nice and centered in this color B, in these 2 color B rows. And then I'm just going to keep working this stripe sequence. I'm not going to show you how to set up for this next section here with the Brioche Plus. I think all the other tutorials already have covered how to knit brioche and how to mix it with garter stitch. So you should be totally fine to knit that on your own. But there is a different increase here in this section that I want to show you. So on the right side, we're going to increase at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the row with lifted increases, directional increases, M1R, M1L, so make one right and make one left. But when we increase on the wrong side, we need to increase with a purl increase. So it's make one right purl and make one left purl. And they do work a little different than the knit versions of these increases. And that is because we have to mirror them. So what happens is that for the make one right, that happens here in the center before the marker, you'd usually go from back to front and lift that strand on your needles and then knit the stitch through the front loop. So that's the usual make one right increase. But we're on the wrong side and we want to make sure that the increase looks just the same as the one we did on the right side. So we have to mirror them. And so the make one right purl wise is done by picking it up in the other direction. So we're going to pick up the strand from front to back like we did with the make one left knit increase, and then we're going to purl this one through the back loop. So this is a little fiddly, especially if you look through a camera while doing it. So we're going to knit them through this back loop of through the back loop of this stitch, and that's the increase, and it's going to lean just the same direction as the make one we did on the right side. So they're going to be matching and look the same on the right side. So here would now follow a make one left purlwise, and usually for the make one left I insert the needle from front to back and then knit it through the back loop. But we're on the purl side and we need to do it differently. So I'm picking the strand up from back to front, and then I'm going to purl it through the front loop. Okay, so they work the same way. You just have to do the picking up of the strand in the exact opposite way we do with the knit versions of these increases. So that's a bit complicated and a little mind bending at the beginning. Don't worry if you mess it up or if you mix it up. It's not too big of a deal, and if you don't want to bother with those at all, you can do those make one increases that are that look like this. So if you don't like the purling through the back loop, you can go with this one here as well. So for doing this increase English style with the yarn held in the right hand, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to increase here now with a make one right purlwise, and I'm going to pick up this yarn that runs between the stitches. I'm going to pick it up from front to back, and then I'm going to purl it through the back loop. For that, I bring the yarn forward, and then I'm going to purl it through this back loop of the stitch. And that's the increase. And I'm going to purl this center stitch next, and after slipping the marker, I'm going to make one left purlwise, and that works similar to the make one right knitwise. So I'm going to insert my needle from back to front, and I'm going to purl through the front loop of the stitch. Okay, so that's the increases made purlwise. If you don't want to bother with those increases on the purl side, you could switch them out with make one increases, and again they are those twisted loops that you put onto your needles, and there's a bit of a faster way, and that is to pick up this loop with your thumb and place it on your needles, and that also makes this twisted loop. So again, just insert the thumb to make that twisted loop that you can place on your needles and pull it tight. So that would be an alternative if you don't want to do those make one left purls and make one right purls. Okay, then keep on knitting.